reporting. And as we continue to look at those courthouse pictures just outside of the courthouse there in New York, let's bring in Neama Rahmani, a former federal prosecutor. Great to have you back with us. I know that you have been kind of commenting on the verdict all day, but let's start with this bail decision. What do you make of it?
Glad to be back, and I predicted this result yesterday. Not happy, but expected. What is not expected, though, is Judge Subramanian denying bail. I'm very surprised at that. Combs has only been convicted of prostitution, and everyone's talking about the 10-year maximum, but that doesn't matter. You can throw that out the door. What matters are the federal sentencing guidelines, which are the advisory range that Combs is looking at. And I've done some rough calculations. I think he's going to end up somewhere within the 15 to 21 month range, not years, months. So he's looking at a potential time served sentence. So keeping Combs in custody when he's not a danger to the community, when he's not a risk of flight, he has been acquitted of sex trafficking and racketeering. I could tell you that no prosecutor in the United States would have taken this case just to charge and convict Combs of prostitution. And let's not forget, when it comes to prostitution, Cassie Ventura and victim Jane are also guilty of prostitution. I'm not saying that they should be prosecuted, but they're contacting the sex workers. They're paying the sex workers cash, Zelle, Cash App. Does this make sense to hold Sean Diddy Combs in custody right now when the prosecution has taken a huge, embarrassing loss? They should take their lumps. They should move on. Free the man.
We're going to stay with you. I also want to bring in Faith Gay, former federal prosecutor, who was with us a bit earlier on the program. Faith, I think you've been listening to Neama's response to that question, but do you agree with that assessment?
Look, I think there are great points you make, but the prosecutors are already on record saying that the sentencing guidelines require at least 55 to 63 months, and that's just the start. And they're also citing the Bail Reform Act, which is what every federal prosecutor goes to in these kinds of situations. And there's two pieces of it, and the huge piece is risk to the community. And of course, the risk of flight is the other one. On danger to the community, they argued that the Mann Act, which is what he was convicted of, and I agree that it's a technical violation, but it's also considered a crime of violence under the Bail Reform Act. And they argued that detention is mandatory. And although, of course, we weren't in the courtroom, I believe the judge explicitly agreed with that and also saw that there was a potentially a sentence of at least 4 or 5 years here. And again, I think the judge is highly influenced by what he heard in court, even though Mr. Combs was for sure acquitted of the more serious charges. The other issue in terms of risk of flight, traditionally, judges are very careful with wealthy defendants. They think that even if their passports are taken, even if they are, wearing security, even if people have put their houses on the line to make sure that the bail is secured, that the wealthy defendant can make all of that right with his securers and may still get away. And that with a person like Combs, who could go anywhere in the world, who has the resources to do that, facing a 4+ year sentence, potentially, he might go.
Neama, what do you think of that?
Look, I'm as pro-prosecution as they come. I put more than 1,000 people in federal prison. I never once charged the Mann Act. It was a throw-in. And I know the judge can consider uncharged conduct or other conduct by a preponderance of the evidence, but this is a case that is now just about prostitution. And the feds don't prosecute prostitution cases. They just don't. So, the fact that the government is here is asking for 4 or 5 years in prison. Earlier, they were asking for the stat max, which is 2 10-year consecutive sentences, or at least that was what's reported. That is not a just result. If you're a federal prosecutor, it's not about wins and losses. It is about pursuing justice. The jury has spoken. They found your victims not credible across the board. They did not find Cassie was sex trafficked. They did not find Mia was sex trafficked or sexually assaulted. And they did not find Jane was sex trafficked. And there was no racketeering, which means that there was no criminal enterprise or conspiracy, or there was no extortion, there was no bribery, there was no kidnapping, there's no drug distribution. You haven't proven anything if you are the Department of Justice. They need to do the right thing. They need to agree to bail for Combs. They need to agree to a time-served sentence or something close to it. You're the prosecution. You have to respect the jury's verdict. And it was a unanimous acquittal. I'm not even calling this a partial verdict. This was a complete and total loss for the prosecution, in my opinion. And to try to backdoor a 4 or 5 year federal sentence on a prostitution charge is unethical. It's wrong, and it's not the oath we took when we became prosecutors for the department.
Okay, and Faith, I know, we talked about this in the earlier part of the show where you said you also see it really as a total failure by the prosecution to prove this case. But if we look ahead to sentencing with Sean Diddy Combs now remaining behind bars until that sentencing, I mean, what do you think we could see there?
Yeah, so look, I agree it was a total failure. And I agree the Mann Act is not only not used, but it's really disfavored. It is seen as sort of morals policing. Even when it was first used, it has been used over the last century in really racially charged ways in this country. So I agree the Mann Act is disfavored. In terms of sentencing, which may well be 2, 3, 4 months from now, I do think the government is going to not ask for 2 10-year terms, but they're going to ask for something at the sentencing guidelines or above, which I would expect to be 4 or 5 years. But I think one of the things we're missing here is this judge, and again, we weren't in the courtroom today, seemed to be highly influenced by what he heard in court. He heard admissions by Mr. Combs' counsel of a lifetime of violence against women, and I think that influenced him. I think he was not happy with Mr. Combs' interactions with the jury. All those atmospherics, I do think, creep in with a judge in terms of just letting him walk out the door. But maybe most importantly, is the fear that something could happen again on this judge's watch. And he doesn't want it to happen, at least prior to sentencing and prior to a good case being made by the defense counsel that he should be free pending appeal, because there are real issues out there on appeal. And I think there probably will be.
And I just want to add, we are getting some news from our U.S. partner here, CBS News, saying that the judge, Arun Subramanian, says that Sean Diddy Combs will get 10 months credit for time served so far, and that he has proposed a sentencing date, October 3rd. The defense has said that they would like an expedited sentencing schedule, and the judge, it appears, did say that there is a difficulty having a pre-sentence report. It looks like there's been a back and forth on this, but the headline there, as we said, is that the judge says that Sean Diddy Combs would get 10 months credit for time served so far, and the sentencing date would be October 3rd, which, as we know, is quite a few months from now. What do you make of that, Neama?
Well, U.S. probation needs time to prepare that pre-sentence report. So at any sentencing in a federal case, there are 3 recommendations. The prosecution makes its recommendation, the defense, and U.S. probation actually makes their own recommendation. And they calculate the sentencing guidelines that Faith and I have been talking about. So it's a lot of math involved, but there's a base offense level, there's enhancements, there's deductions for certain things, there's a criminal history category, and they make their own recommendations. So there's 3 sets of recommendations, and probation does need time. They typically need approximately 3 months. So sometimes 4 months, depending on the district. So that's absolutely right. I'm sure the defense wants to push that up because they want to get Combs out as quickly as possible. And I think they have a very good argument for time served or a lesser sentence. But there's only certain things you can do. We're dealing with the federal government and U.S. probation, so it's not going to happen anytime sooner.
Faith, just want to get your take on this as well.
Oh, for sure. I mean, look, I think the sentencing date and the time credit is very standard. Of course, he's going to get credit for the time he's been in, but I don't think we're going to see the government walk back from looking for an incarceratory sentence that goes well beyond 10 months or well beyond 20 months. And I do think there might be a chance for release on appeal if these defense lawyers can come up with real arguments as to why the Mann Act shouldn't even apply here. It will be hard for them because it's largely a technical statute, but I think they're going to lay that against the jury's other counts of acquittal and try to come up with an argument that will be the verdict on these counts are inconsistent, and I expect to see that.
Okay, Faith and Neama, stay there. I just want to remind our viewers who are just joining us now that we have seen this news now that the judge has denied Sean Diddy Combs' request for bail, that he will remain in detention until his sentencing. And as I just mentioned, our partner CBS News saying that the judge has put that sentencing date to be October 3rd. This is here the image that we've been showing you all evening from just outside the courthouse. We're going to show you some images of some of the crowds just outside. Now, these are the images you've been seeing behind our correspondent, Nomi Iqbal, as she's been reporting, and she was indeed just detailing this. This is a case, as you can see, that has gotten intense media coverage. You can see a reporter here just doing a live coverage at the moment. And just behind her, you'll see these rows of people. There have been everyday people, as our correspondent has said, who have showed up to watch as this trial unfolds. The jury deliberations just started on Monday, and the crowds really have been growing, reaching that fevered pitch, if you will, yesterday when we learned that the jury had reached a partial verdict, the judge then sending the jury back to reach a verdict on that first count of racketeering. Fast forward to today, where we saw Sean Diddy Combs, that the jury reached a not guilty verdict for Sean Diddy Combs on those most serious charges, including that racketeering charge and the sex trafficking charge. So we're looking at these doors, but we're not expecting now, as we know, Sean Diddy Combs to actually come out of those courthouse doors because, again, the judge has denied his request for bail. He will be held in prison until that sentencing on October 3rd. We also understand from the judge who told our partner CBS News that Sean Diddy Combs will get 10 months credit for time served so far. So Faith and Neama, as we continue to look at these images, and we really have seen such incredible interest in this case. Faith, starting with you, how does that complicate a trial like this for both the prosecution and the defense and the judge, for that matter?
Well, look, I mean, it's fascinating because there is a sense that this particular prosecution reached into the privacy of one's bedroom, reached in a way using statutes, including the Mann Act, that are not all that often used in federal court, maybe by the state in terms of dealing with prostitution, but not by the federal government. So there's all kinds of, I think, jury currents here with particular groups who've gone through an invasion of their privacy, have gone through an invasion of their First Amendment rights. We're in a period in American history where there's all kinds of people being arrested off the street for really nebulous charges. So, thinking about immigrants, African Americans, gay people, you name it, those kinds of currents, putting that against a very, very popular icon in Mr. Combs, those are huge jury currents. I think it's tough for the prosecution. I think it's one of the reasons you might have seen a little bit more benefit of the doubt in this case, along with some of the challenges that have been mentioned here with the witnesses. So yeah, all of those things matter a great deal. The court will not screen those out. The court lives in the world, reads the news, but the court will also feel like he's got to go along with the pathways that are recognized here, the sentencing guidelines that we've mentioned, victim statements. The victims here are very ably represented. We're going to hear from them in the pre-sentence report. We're going to hear from them at the sentencing. They are going to be pushing for time. They're going to be repeating their stories for purposes of sentencing under the Mann Act. All those things will complicate things in the extreme for this court.
Neama, what's your take on the challenges of carrying out a trial like this in these conditions?
Look, it's not easy. And, we saw this with Harvey Weinstein, right? Jurors ask themselves, well, if you're sexually abused, you were trafficked, you were assaulted, why did you stay with your abuser? And that's one of the challenges I've had as a prosecutor handling these cases and now as a current victims' rights lawyer. But taking a step back, right, we're talking about prostitution here, and we're talking about sentencing. And the fundamental issue I have with all this is, let me just go on record. I think Sean Diddy Combs is a terrible human being. I think he's a monster. I can't unsee that video from 2016 of him beating Cassie Ventura. But we have a criminal justice system, emphasis on justice. And he was just convicted of prostitution, which is rarely, if ever, handled in federal court. You don't make a federal case out of prostitution. And the fundamental problem I have is this. If Combs is guilty of prostitution, so are Cassie Ventura and victim Jane. They're contacting the sex workers. They're setting up the freak-offs in the hotel nights. They're paying them cash, Zelle, Cash App themselves. Now, I'm not suggesting in any world that Cassie Ventura and Jane or anyone else should be prosecuted for prostitution. But ex ante, taking a step back, would the government have taken this case and just prosecuted Combs with prostitution, no prosecutor in the entire United States of America would have taken this case. So that's why I think this is not a just result. The denial of bail, I expect the defense to appeal this to the Second Circuit Court of Appeal. If there is indeed a sentence of incarceration of years in federal prison, setting aside the time served that he's already been in, this is why people think it's a vindictive prosecution. This is why people think it's political and he's being railroaded. And the people that say that and are watching, they're absolutely right. No one else would be treated the same way that Combs is being treated after being convicted of just prostitution.
As you're speaking, maybe we can pick up some of those pictures again of people just outside the courtroom. We see people holding up cell phones as they're watching all of this take place there. We see these images. Our correspondent, Nomi Iqbal, had mentioned that there are plenty of influencers, plenty of YouTubers, TikTokers who have been really covering this trial, following it day by day. And just to say that one of our correspondents, Sakshi Venkataraman, has said that when the words came out that bail is denied, audible gasps erupted in an overflow room that was actually filled with Sean Diddy Combs supporters and fans. A lot of them were stunned and disappointed. Really, they had been celebrating the fact that he was acquitted on 3 of his 5 charges. So just to give you a sense of a bit of the mood there outside of the courthouse, where you do have a lot of supporters of Sean Diddy Combs who have perhaps been hoping to see him walk out of that courthouse today. Faith, just as we continue to look at these images, really, obviously, many disappointed people, but also this massive media presence that we're looking at as well. Just tell us what it means. I just want to go back to one point that we heard from CBS News. The defense said they would like an expedited sentencing schedule. I'm assuming that means they want to try to move up that sentencing date to as soon as possible.
They want every chance to get him out as fast as possible. But as we've been discussing, the pre-sentence report is a little bit of a labored proceeding. We're dealing with the federal government, which is going through huge chaos and cutbacks. Actually, October is not a particularly lengthy time. I doubt it will be moved up very much at all. And keep in mind that even though there are parameters in a sentencing, obviously the sentencing guidelines, obviously victim statements, the sentencing proceeding in federal court remains extremely expansive and freewheeling. The judge is able to take all kinds of things into account. Past bad conduct, the past great things Mr. Combs has done, the victim statements, what he saw in the courtroom, even if it was acquitted conduct, all of that can be legally taken into account. And no one is there in the courtroom except the district court doing it. And the standard on appeal is very deferential to what the district court does. And my sense is that this is a very responsible judge. And with a case of this notoriety, he is going to make super sure he crosses every T and dots every I, including giving the defense counsel plenty of process here.
And Neama, coming back to you, what do you think this case tells us about this type of trial? As Faith just said, a trial with plenty of notoriety, one where, as you said earlier, the prosecution had a very difficult time making their case.
Well, let me say this. I think the prosecution in some ways botched this case. I want to go through many of the mistakes that they made. They named Gina victim 3 in the indictment when they didn't have assurances she would show up at trial. Days before trial, they say they can't find her. You know, you have to accept the very real possibility that one of your victims will either be paid off, scared, or embarrassed and not show. And they named someone in indictment that they were unsure about. They try to bring in all these prior bad acts witnesses. They litigate that, and then they don't bring anyone. They rely on victims that have a romantic, personal, professional relationship with Combs, and they don't take into consideration that their own words, their emails, their text messages, and social media posts are going to be used against them to really destroy them on cross-examination, impeach them, and undermine their credibility. They don't get their bad facts out on direct. They let their key witness victims be destroyed on cross. They don't call Christina Joram, KK, or D-Rock, the head of the Combs organizations, the right-hand woman, his chief of staff, KK, D-Rock, is head of security, that was actively involved in all these racketeering activities. Look, when I was a prosecutor, I primarily handled narcotics and drug cartels. I can tell you that I always flipped lower-level people in the organization to testify against the head. And I can only count on 2 fingers the number of people I was unable to flip. So that was a huge miss by the prosecution. They didn't bring any of the child victims who have filed civil lawsuits. Let's not forget, children can't consent to sexual activity. That removes that defense. Or why not bring the victims who were one-off victims that were sexually assaulted allegedly by Combs, that don't have those messages, those words of affirmation? So I expected a lot more from the prosecution. The presentation was underwhelming. Some of the victims were not good. Other the witnesses were downright terrible. So I
Okay.
don't think this is necessarily an indictment of the Me Too movement in general, but really a poor performance in this particular case.
We have to leave it there, but Neama and Faith, really good to have you both on to get your expert analysis on the story as it's been developing. So thank you both so much.
Thank
Of course,
you.
thanks for having me.